In the next session, we have Justin King and Ephraim Rosario here. So Justin is the industry VP at Salsify and author of the book Digital Branch Secrets. So Justin has more than 20 years of experience in e-commerce and has previously served in executive roles at Oracle, Endeca, and Rosetta. And then Ephraim leads the OmniChannel marketing, re-commerce, and digital customer experience practice at Grounded World, what a mouthful, which is a certified B Corp and boutique marketing agency who helps socially conscious brands accelerate purpose-led marketing. So bringing 20 years plus of Fortune 500 and startup experience, he's joining us today. So he's born in Porto, but lives in Paris now. So over to you both. Looking forward to the session.
Thank you so much. So welcome to this discussion with Ephraim about omni-channel strategy in online grocery. So just a quick anecdote. As a consumer, the last year has really changed my family, at least our family's online shopping behavior. It's pretty significantly. So I have 4 kids. Jim Gaffigan says, he's a comedian. He says, if you want to know what it's like to have 4 kids, just imagine you're drowning. And then somebody hands you a baby. That's exactly what it's like in my house with 4 kids. I don't just have 4 kids. I have 4 teenage daughters, if you can imagine that. And we have to buy a lot of things to keep these 4 teenage daughters happy. The most surprising to me is the amount of makeup wipes that we go through in a given week. I really don't understand it. But in our house, we've gone from ordering household things from Amazon to ordering everything we do online. Grocery probably being the #1 change in our family. And that change didn't end as things started to open up from the pandemic. We've kept those changes mainly because it's just easier and more efficient. Instead of lists, our kids get to add to online lists. And then, by the way, they tend to add these items that they shouldn't be adding, like chips and sweets. In fact, I have a few kids that are particularly tricky. They know exactly where we're going to hit the checkout button. So right before we hit the checkout button, they add a few items to the list to kind of sneak it in. But we're not just talking about personal anecdotes today. We're really going to tackle quite a few topics. We're going to look at the trends in online grocery as it applies to omnichannel. We're going to talk about what's Amazon's role in online grocery in the UK and what should brands do to respond to these trends. So let's start with some trends. So before the pandemic, digital grocery was estimated 3 to 4%. We've heard some of these before earlier today. And of that, the majority of the spending was actually on dry, kind of shelf-stable goods. Frozen and fresh was a much smaller portion. After a year of the pandemic, this has risen to 10%. And this is most likely to be a permanent change in consumer behavior. Through forecasting, we've actually found that we've accelerated and progressed this behavior by at least 5 years into the future. If we compare the rates of growth of online grocery versus in-store, which is pretty fascinating, before the pandemic, we saw online growing between 50 and 75%. But as a result of the pandemic, we're now growing at 150% a year. Online grocers were the winners, but places like restaurants and bars were the big losers. Customers are now spending more of their calorie budget. They're spending 70% of their calorie budget at the peak of the pandemic in the online grocers. And that's now leveled off to be about 60%, which was much higher before. It's kind of split 50-50 before. Not only do we see more sales, but I think it's fascinating that of all the categories, we've actually seen higher prices in grocery more than any other industry. We've actually increased instead of decreased, like in so many other categories. Another huge change that we've seen is that grocers, they weren't really focused, when it came to online, they weren't really focused on profitability. But now that it's moved from 3 to 4% to 10%, this is all of a sudden a big deal. And really, they've seen kind of 2 problems traditionally that they try to overcome, really kind of 2 big costs. The two big costs are that the labor to actually pick the items. The labor to pick the items was traditionally done by the individual, right? By the consumer. They picked the items. Then you took your own labor to actually deliver that product to your house. In e-commerce, expectations are that you will pick, the grocers will pick and deliver. And the consumers, they don't want to pay more for that. Grocers want to actually defray those two costs. And it turns out that consumers have been more than willing to drive and actually pick up their items. So the grocers are now just forced to pick the items from the shelves, but we as consumers are now actually willing to drive and pick that up. That's really changed the profitability for grocers and truly online grocery.
Yeah, and Justin, just if I could add just one point to that real quick is that, one of my experiences during this pandemic has been, going to my local supermarket here in France, just outside of Paris at off-peak hours. And, that usually means going pretty early in the morning. And I'm always fascinated that when I go at those times, I'm usually outnumbered 10 or 15 to 1 by all the pickers who are there at my local Monoprix filling orders that they fulfill through Amazon. So it's really fascinating to see how we've seen retailers, in essence, repurpose some of their existing physical stores as, hub and spoke fulfillment centers for online orders as well. And, I think I'm always amazed as to the volume of that I see, particularly here in France.
Yeah, I mean, and we've watched curbside growth for the consumers grow at almost grow to 130%. Just incredible. So, like Efren, you were saying, we're actually watching grocers repurpose real estate, and I think this is a big shift. Repurpose real estate not for expansion and more shelf space as it used to be, but repurposing for automation and fulfillment. We even see brand new buildings being built just for delivery and just for fulfillment of these e-commerce orders, especially with that kind of new profitability model in place. I love this. Offline is now being incorporated into in-store. This price tag, it's a digital price tag, is actually showing ratings and reviews from online inside of an in-store. So we were watching offline shift to online, online shift to offline, kind of both ways. And then lastly, consumer habits. Sustainability and responsibility are now playing a significant role in the shopping and purchase decisions. I don't think we've seen that specifically. Maybe it's growing over the last just couple of years, but certainly not in the last decade, especially for the Gen Z and millennials.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, one of the interesting articles that I've read in the last couple of months has been one from Forrester, where they mentioned that these Gen Z shoppers are what we call truth barometers. In that more than half of them say that they always check a company's CSR policy before actually making a purchase. And I don't think it's just the Gen Zs shoppers that are doing that. I think overall, we're starting to see where those are becoming factors in regards to people's purchase decisions before, whether that be in grocery or it could be in other categories as well.
So Efren, I'm curious about this. So in the U.S., at least, Amazon has just made some major inroads. Maybe a little more in the U.K., but certainly in the rest of Europe, not as much. Why have you seen Amazon not make as many inroads as they have in other places?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Because first off, I think it's difficult to have one overarching statement around Europe with regards to Amazon penetration, just because obviously, it's 50, almost 40 to 50 nations. So it's hard to think about them in a homogeneous sort of way. That being said, as you alluded to, consumer habits vary pretty significantly across some of these countries, as well as local government regulation. And I think that's one of the factors that I think has impacted Amazon and has favored some of the incumbent retailers, has been the levels of government regulation that are in place. I think France is a great example of that with regards to some of the established retailers here like Carrefour, Auchan, and Leclerc. Another thing that comes to mind for me has been that, one of the greatest tools that Amazon has at their disposal is the Prime membership base, right? So, I think that time has shown that has been a significant contributor to their overall growth. But when you look and you peel back the 200 million subscribers that are Prime members overall, 147 million of those are in the US. So they just don't have the penetration rates yet in some of these European markets with regards to Prime. So I think has impacted their growth as well. And then lastly, I think, going back to consumption habits, I think, another one of the things that Amazon has that works to their advantage is next day delivery. And I think here in Europe, because click and collect, curbside pickup has been prevalent for so long, I think consumers, don't see it as that big of a step change with regards to, being able to get their groceries, because they do have this other alternative to having to just go and, pick up and buy and pick up in the store, right? So I think that that's also worked against Amazon to date.
Efren, Amazon, what Amazon's done really well though is supply chain, right? And in our conversations, we talked a lot about the assortment. So the assortment within Amazon is lower than it is in other places, like the US. However, with the supply chain part kind of figured out, in your opinion, what's harder for Amazon to do, or what's harder for a retailer to do, building assortment or supply chain? Which one do you think is more important?
It's hard for me to say as a longtime marketer, but I do think that supply chain is by far the harder of those two to solve for. I think, with assortment, once you reach that tipping point, and, particularly if you're working and collaborating either through a third party or directly with your manufacturers, I think, once you reach that tipping point, I think assortment is an easier hill to climb than supply chain, particularly now.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think supply chain in general, especially when you look at omni-channel strategy, supply chain then becomes the core of that customer experience, right? I don't necessarily remember the experience online, but I remember that I clicked the button and it got there, right? The end of the experience often is more important than even the beginning of the experience.
Yeah. So to me, I think, there's two things come to mind. One is that the impact of out of stock in regards to, as a shopper, if you go and you buy something and you're right there at the moment of wanting to hit click to buy all those groceries, and you find that stuff is out of stock, the impact that has on you and the perception you have of the retailer and or the brand is huge.
Yeah. Stock items is such an important part of an omnichannel strategy.
For sure.
So Efren, let's get practical here. Let's talk about what brands are doing. And really, as we think through those trends, we think about what Amazon's doing. What can brands do to position themselves for the rest of 2021? Let's start by talking about content. So looking into the future, not 5 years in the future, but the next just couple months in the next year, what kind of content do you see consumers needing next?
Yeah, no, I think that, that's actually a great segue from your prior question around Amazon and that and supply chain, in that I think we've seen a pretty interesting evolution of product data over the last 15 plus years. So I think, if you look back to the very beginnings where we were dealing with GS1 standards and then evolving to, particularly here in Europe, around regulation, providing nutritional information around the products that you sell, that's all of a sudden started to evolve into thinking about enhanced content in the form of images and videos that you can use, particularly below the fold. And now I think where that's brought us today has been to really address a growing consumer need around increased transparency, right? So consumers are wanting to have more information around where products are sold, where products are manufactured, how are they delivered, and ultimately, is that done in an ethical sort of way? So I think one is consumers want that increased transparency, wanting to understand what is the carbon footprint of the products they're buying, both the primary product, but also secondary packaging. And then secondly, I think beyond that is that consumers are now starting not to look at just product data, but they're also wanting to understand at a company level where you stand with regards to some of these sustainability and social responsibility type factors. So I think, things like being a certified B Corp, I think are starting to gain a lot of awareness with consumers with regards to being as a badge that, you don't just look at profit, but you're looking at the greater good with regards to what you do and how you actually create and manufacture and distribute your products.
Interesting. I think too, when we think about data and content, thinking about omni-channel strategy, supply chain, really omni-channel means a whole company experience. But supply chain content becomes very important as part of the data that's needed between brands and retailers and at the end, the consumer, especially when you look at automation as retailers start to repurpose real estate for automation and fulfillment, the packaging data, the weights, the dimensions, the size of the pallets, the size of the packages becomes critical. You can't have automation without very minutia of data around the package of that product. So I think the supply chain data becomes even more important, whether that's GDSN type data or even more data being collected between the brand and retailer about how that's delivered. I'm interested in your perspective. You spent a lot of time at Coke, and you and I have talked a lot about what you've done at Coke. But how did you measure e-commerce and digital while you were at Coke?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think for me the critical question here, particularly as it pertains to digital and e-commerce, is how can brands incorporate digital and e-com performance into existing data measurement practices that they have in place. And I say that because I think it's critical in terms of being able to break through some of the internal silos that a lot of people like myself at larger companies have experienced with regards to being able to, again, collaborate with, the brand marketing teams or trade marketing or whoever it may be, again, towards thinking, what is the impact that what I'm doing on digital and e-com going to have in regards to delivering ultimately more sales. So at Coke, we had one framework that we developed, and this was, again, how we looked at shopper performance, not just through digital channels and e-com channels, but we looked at it, across all of our channels. And ultimately, it really comes down to two key levers, which is the frequency and the weight of purchase, right? So what I think helped a lot for us when in rolling this out was that when we started to relaunch this, a few years back, we tied it directly to an overarching objective that we had as a company. So in our case at Coca-Cola, it was Vision 2020. And we use that in terms of being able to, when we roll this out to the market, say, this is how you can reach your Vision 2020 goals with regards to profitability and volume projections based on these levers. And in some cases, we were able to demonstrate to markets, hey, you are on the right track, and based on our projections, you're good to go. Whereas in other cases, we were able to show markets, you've got a tough road ahead if you're going to continue down this current path. And here are some of the recommendations we would make with regards to trying to drive increased frequency, for example, of more trips into your retailers as opposed to just wanting to grow basket size. So this was like I said, the example that we used, and it worked well for us for those reasons.
How far was the representation in your executive team? Did your executive team understand these measurements?
Absolutely. I think that's also, part of it as well, right? Is that simplicity is a beautiful thing, right? So rather than introducing new metrics or getting way too granular with our executive teams, we really did keep it to these 4 metrics. And like I said, then really looking at frequency and weight of purchase in regards to how we reported results. And this was actually just something that we did use, with senior management. So this was, the tool that we used in reporting market performance on a monthly basis for our top 22 markets. And then also what we used when we looked at our large global campaigns, and we did after action reviews in regards to saying, what kind of impact did this deliver at retail?
Interesting. So I guess the last kind of question on this that I'm curious on your perspective of is what we've been hearing from customers, probably more than anything else, is both kind of retailers and brands, is there's a big need when you look at omni-channel strategy, representing your brand online, representing sustainability, everything from the product detail page to product data to the actual experience they have with retailers. There's a big need for lots more collaboration between brands, distributors, retailers. I mean, across that kind of whole supply chain, not just a physical product transfer supply chain, but e-commerce supply chain, right? From content else. What are you seeing when it comes to the need for collaboration on both sides?
Yeah. It's interesting. So I think that as we had a roundtable on this very topic about driving increased collaboration between retailers and brands, that it's not a new topic. I think one thing that has evolved, particularly with digital and e-commerce, has been the increased or the heightened role of data as the common language between retailers and brands. So, if I think about almost like two sides of the same coin, right? Where brands are going to have a lot of information with regards to the motivations and the pain points of their target consumers, and ultimately how their products or their brands are able to address those needs and wants. On the other hand, retailers obviously know everything about what happens at the actual point of purchase in terms of what actually was purchased, what it was bought in addition to, where it was purchased, when it was purchased. So I think when you combine those two things, when you can combine the consumer portion and the shopper portion of the data, I think that's when you get that 360-degree view that I think we all covet.
Very good. What's the difference that you see between data a brand has about their customer versus data a retailer has?
I think, well, in some cases, I think it's if I think about retailers, obviously they've got, tangible information that's been collected at their actual stores. Whereas a lot of times from a consumer standpoint or from a brand standpoint, we're thinking about third-party sources like household panel or proprietary research that we may have done. So in a lot of cases, we are projecting across, a broader population. So I think, accuracy can obviously be greatly increased the closer you get to the point of sale, which, again, I think all the more reason for wanting to collaborate. But to that point, one thing I was going to ask Justin is that I saw something in the news recently involving Salsify that talked a little bit about this collaboration point between retailers and brands. And I don't know if you want to go into that a little bit more.
No, we made an exciting announcement this week that Salsify and Alchemix are joining forces. Salsify works with brands and manufacturers to help them win on the digital shelf, so brand and manufacturer focus. But Alchemix works with the retailers and the distributors to help them win on the digital shelf. So you combine these two companies, we're really up the game in the retailer supplier collaboration. That's what we're most excited about. There's a significant need for collaboration, things around product content, pricing, contracts, terms and conditions, inventory, order management between these. And another big ask in the market has been to remove all the walled gardens and toll roads and create a more open world concept, so it's not all pay to play. So we're really excited about building this commerce experience network that serves both retailers and brands. So I appreciate you asking about that. So it's going to be an amazing opportunity. Let's wrap this up, Efren. If you were a grocery brand, what are the three things that you would do in the next 60 days?
Yeah, I think, the three words or the three phrases that come to mind was, first, I think getting crystal clear on your purpose. So I think, as we talked about with consumption habits, is that consumers, particularly younger generations like Gen Z and millennials, are wanting to understand where you stand as a brand and what you are put on this earth to do. And they want to understand that so they can see how that aligns to their individual values, right? So, and I think, without that connection, it's really hard for a brand to be able to build consumer trust. And we know that consumer trust, particularly in the CPG industry, could stand to be improved. So that's the first thing I would say. And typically when we work with clients at Grounded, that's the first step of the process that we use.
This is what you guys do, right? This is
exactly, before we do any sort of omnichannel strategy work, this is really one of the things that we do. We either help clients develop it, or in some cases they've already got it. So we make sure that we take that into account in the work that we do. I think secondly would be thinking about striving for data excellence. So I think, not just about the collaboration that we just talked about with regards to between retailers and brands, but really thinking about how you can be a good data citizen, right? And that means understanding where and how your data is sourced and being real purposeful with regards to how you plan on using it. I think, regulations like GDPR obviously are a great first step with regards to letting consumers understand that they're giving consent, or if they're not choosing to give consent. But now I think it's about, increased transparency in terms of what you do. And then lastly, I think that consumer trust and data excellence really serve as a foundation for delivering engaging shopper experiences and really winning at the point of sale. And, to me, I think the other thing that comes to mind with this, and again, we had a roundtable discussion on this, is, having clear point of view and strategy with regards to retail media. So what is it that you're going to do with regards to, now that you understand who your target audiences are, where should you go to go reach them? How are you going to choose to allocate budget? How are you ultimately going to measure the results that you're having with regards to that? I think, having a clear line of sight and strategy on that, I think is going to be critical.
Thank you, Efren, for that time. Really, that was very insightful.